Hi, this is Dr. Neela Bakure, and we are done with the basics of reproduction in organisms. In this unit of reproduction, the first chapter is of the basic things, and the next two chapters include sexual reproductions in flowering plants and in human beings. Because we are now going to take the sexual reproduction segment of our unit, let us discuss some more basic things only, but those are important for us to actually discuss the chapter of sexual reproduction in organisms like flowering plants and animals. So, it is in continuation with the basics only, but we have segregated the sexual reproduction part so that we are able to link it with the next chapters. So, if you are talking of only sexual reproduction, and again we are not going into the details of the reproductive systems like in female flowering reproductive parts, what exactly are the parts, how they work, we are not discussing that, because that we would include in the next chapter, which is the main part. But to do that, we need to understand some basic things which are little more than basic, you can say. We discussed that sexual reproduction means gamete formation, fusion of gamete, zygote is formed, then the zygote divides and an organism is formed. So, in sexual reproduction, there is one stage which is known as gametogenesis. This gametogenesis means gamete formation. In case of animals, the male gamete is known as sperm and the female gamete is known as egg. In case of plants, the male gamete is known as only male gamete, it is inside the pollen grain, and female gamete is known as egg. So, we can write the male gamete or the sperm, and the female gamete is known as egg or ova or ovum. The male gamete is always smaller in size as compared to the female gamete. So, it is also known as microgamete. Whereas, egg as compared to the male gamete is always bigger. So, it is known as macrogamete. The process by which these gametes are formed are known as spermatogenesis in case of male gamete or sperm form, and oogenesis in case of egg or ovum formation. And in these two processes of spermatogenesis and oogenesis, the type of division which are involved are both mitosis as well as meiosis. Here we are writing meiosis because this is the reductional division with the help of which from a diploid parent cell, haploid gametes are formed. These gametes would fuse. The process is known as fertilization, and the diploid structure which is formed is known as zygote. This zygote will divide by mitotic divisions now and will give rise to a complete organism. So, this is the basic layout of the sexual reproduction. Now, the entire process is divided into three zones: pre-fertilization. So events which are before fertilization would come under pre-fertilization, then fertilization, and then after fertilization whatever happens are post-fertilization changes. Now out of this entire process that we have talked of, our middle point, that is fertilization stage, is here. So fertilization includes simple fusion of gametes, which is also known as syngamy. So this is the event. Now what all is required before that? Before that, first thing which is required is gametogenesis, that is gamete formation. When these gametes are formed, how will they come closer so that this fusion or fertilization takes place? In plants, the male gamete is produced inside the pollen grain, and pollen grain is produced in the anther part of the flower. From the anther, when these pollens are released, they should travel to the stigma. This transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is known as pollination. So the second step is transfer of male gamete to the female gamete. Invariably, in higher organisms, the female gametes do not move from their position. They are fixed. They remain in the ovary itself. But male gametes are produced in the male reproductive part, but they have to travel up to the female reproductive part or the female gamete. So in case of plants, this transfer of male gamete to the female reproductive part or the stigma of the female reproductive part is known as pollination. This pollination is transfer. If this transfer has to take place, there should be some agency which is going to carry this pollen grain from anther to stigma. Wind can act as agency, water can act as an agency, animals, insects, anything can act as an agency. So these agencies, they help in transfer of male gamete from the anther to the stigma. This process is known as pollination. In case of animals, sexually reproducing animals, there are two important things which are possible. Either the gametes are released outside the body and fertilization takes place outside. If gametes are released out, then these gametes will fuse outside the body. For example, in some aquatic animals, the male gamete is also released by the male animal or organism, and the female gamete is also released. They fuse in the open environment outside the body. Then that fertilization is known as external fertilization. And if the gamete, in case of higher animals, the male gamete is deposited into the body of the female gamete. So it is known as insemination, where the male gamete is deposited or released in the female's body. So it is right there near the egg. It has to just travel a little bit and fusion will take place. This type of fertilization is known as internal fertilization. external fertilization means after this the zygote which is formed, those zygotes will also remain in the open, that is outside the body. They are highly vulnerable. So, the risk with external fertilization is that all zygotes which are formed, they are in the open, normally in water body. So, they are highly vulnerable that they can be eaten up by other organisms. In case of internal fertilization, the zygote which is formed, it remains inside the female body, and either it will be laid in the form of egg or it will be developing into a fetus and a organism will be born. So, in case of oviparous and viviparous these things will take place. So, we will take those two terms little later, but there is a risk in case of external fertilization, and that is why organisms which show or exhibit external fertilization, the number of gametes produced is very high. So that if millions and millions of gametes are produced and millions of zygotes are formed, at least few will survive. Whereas in case of internal fertilization, even if the number of zygotes is less, the chances of the survival of all of them is higher. So, there is a negative thing about external fertilization, that the zygotes are vulnerable, whereas in case of internal fertilization, because they are in the body or maybe they will be covered with a shell and all, so they are safer as compared to in case of external fertilization. So, now the gamete has been transferred. After the male and female gametes they come closer, the next event is fertilization. Syngamy. What happens after fertilization? In case of plants, there is a long chain of events which takes place. In case of plants, the egg is inside the ovule and ovules are inside the ovary. So, after fertilization has taken place, all parts except ovary start to fall off. In some cases, the sepals or the calyx part remains attached. We call it persistent calyx, which we see in case of tomatoes and brinjal. That green thing which still remains attached to the fruit, that is a persistent one. But normally we find that all other floral parts, they fall off, only ovary remains. So, in case of plant, if this is the ovary attached to the thalamus, it remains, and all other things, that is style, stigma, petals, sepals, everything is going to fall off. Inside the ovary is an ovule. In this case, we are just drawing one, and in the ovule, here is the zygote formed. So, now this zygote will form the embryo. All these things are going to happen after fertilization. This ovule will change into a seed, and this complete ovary starts to enlarge and changes into fruit. This outer wall which is visible to us, that is the ovary wall, it will become the fruit wall. So, ovary wall will become fruit wall. Fruit wall is known as pericarp. And in this ovule, this outer cover which we call the integument, this will change into seed coat. So, integuments change into seed coat. There are normally two integuments and they would change into two seed coats. There are two layers which are present the outer one and the inner one. They are called testa and tegmen, that we would see later on when we come to the structure of seeds and all. But these are the changes which take place after fertilization in case of a plant. In animals, there are two possibilities. Either the zygote would get surrounded by shell and would form an egg with sufficient quantity of yolk and will be laid. So, there are oviparous animals which would lay the eggs, and viviparous animals which give birth. So, if the eggs are to be laid, there should be sufficient quantity of yolk inside it. If the yolk quantity is not sufficient, then during metamorphosis we would see some intermediate stages. For example, in butterflies, from the egg what hatches is known as a larval stage, which we call caterpillar. Then this caterpillar changes, it feeds, it is a free feeding stage, you can say. The caterpillars are voracious feeders. They feed, collect that nourishment. Why are they collecting this nourishment? Because in the egg, the quantity of yolk was very, very less. So, from larva, now they would change into pupa stage. Pupa stage is the changes which are taking place inside the body from a larva to the adult stage. And from pupa, that cocoon, what comes out is the adult. And this is possible, or this rather takes place because the quantity of the yolk was less. But if the quantity of yolk is sufficient, then such self-sufficient eggs are known as cladoic eggs. Cladoic eggs are self-sufficient in the sense that they have enough yolk which is requirement for the formation of a complete organism. There is no larva or pupa stage. Like what we see in case of reptiles and birds. The eggs have a hard shell and they have significant quantity of yolk, and what comes out of the egg is almost a fully formed organism. It is smaller in size. In case of birds, it may not have feathers, it may be little weaker, but you don't see larva stage. It looks like an adult. There could be a little things which would be missing, but those would very soon take place. So, in animals, if it is oviparous, there are two possibilities: the eggs with less yolk and eggs with sufficient yolk. In case of viviparous animals, the zygote gets implanted into the uterus and a placenta is formed. So, the nourishment which is required for the development of that embryo is coming from the mother's body, and that is why the yolk content is insignificant. So, this is what happens in case of viviparous animals. These changes are after fertilization. So, we call them post-fertilization events. In post-fertilization events, everything is coming from a zygote, and that is known as embryogenesis. So, here embryogenesis. In case of asexual reproduction, we said it is known as blastogenesis. In case of sexual reproduction, where the two gametes have fused to form a zygote and then zygote gives rise to a complete organism, is known as embryogenesis. So, this post-fertilization events are under embryogenesis. In animals and plants, there are variations. Now, some more terms which we would be talking about when we discuss sexual reproduction in plants and human beings. Some important terms like seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. There are some animals which have a season when they reproduce. So, seasonal breeders, they have a cycle which they undergo during which the sex organs, they mature or grow or become functional only for that period of time, and after that the sex organs again become inactive, or they stop producing the gametes. In animals, higher animals we are talking of, this cycle is known as estrous cycle. This estrous cycle is spelled in two ways. You can write it as OES or sometimes only ES. Both are acceptable spellings. So there is an estrous cycle in which there is no menstruation, rest everything is same. In primates or in primate females, there is a different cycle which is known as menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is seen only in primates. Primate group includes apes and human beings. So, ape females and human females, there is this menstrual cycle. Seasonal breeders normally have a shorter period when they are capable of reproduction, whereas higher animals like primates, they are continuous breeders. So, these primates are continuous breeders. So, there is no fixed period when they are capable of producing gametes and reproduction can take place. So, seasonal breeders and continuous breeders. Many times we find that one organism has only one sex organ, like one type of sex organ, either male or female. One organism, one sex organ, either male or female. Such organisms are known as unisexual. There are some organisms where one organism has both the sex organs, that is male and female both. They are called bisexual. Amongst bisexual organism, we normally take the example of flowers or plants where a flower has both the sex organs. When we draw a typical flower, in the middle part we draw the ovary with stigma style, and we also make these anthers. So, here there is a female reproductive part also and a male reproductive part in the same flower of the same plant. Such are bisexual ones. So, you can write any common example like your China rose, all of them are bisexual, where one flower or one plant produces both the types of gametes, male gametes as well as female gametes. But there are certain plants, and we will take the examples of animals also. Here let us write China rose, which is hibiscus, or the regular rose, or any other common flower. Unisexual ones where one flower produces or has only one type of sex organs. Now, if it is unisexual and we are talking of plant, suppose the flower has only male reproductive part. Male reproductive part is the stamen, that is anther and filament. Such flowers are known as staminate. And if the flower has only female reproductive part, that is only pistil, then they are known as pistillate. So, unisexual, only one sex organ, that is either male or female. And if in case of plants it has only male reproductive part, they will call staminate. If only female reproductive part, pistillate. So, these two terms important. Let us also talk about two more terms, monoecious and dioecious. Monoecious are organisms which are bisexual. So, monoecious are actually bisexual. That means one organism has both the sex organs, and dioecious means they are two separate individuals for two different sexes. So, they are unisexual. If we talk of animals, most of the animals are unisexual, where we see a male animal and a female animal, or in lower animals like even insects, we talk of a male cockroach and a female cockroach. So, here in case of animals, we can take the example of cockroach, just one example, and if we have to write the example for plants, we can take the example of papaya or even date palm. So, here most of the animals are unisexual, whereas most of the plants are bisexual. Unisexual plants like papaya or even date palm. Are we aware of any animal which has both the sex organs? I am sure you have heard of this. Amongst animals, earthworm, tapeworm, that is Tinea solium. One individual, one organism has both the sex organs. In case of earthworm as well as tapeworm or liver fluke, that is fasciola, one organism, one animal has male reproductive structures also, that is testes, and the female reproductive structure also, that is ovaries. Such animals or such organisms which are bisexual, having same organism having both the sex organs, are also given one term. They are called hermaphrodite. Such organisms are known as hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodite term is given to an organism where one organism possesses both the sex organs, that is male as well as female sex organs. So, we are talking about some terms important to this chapter of sexual reproduction, that is which we are going to take up next. One more term which is meiocytes. Meiocyte term is given to those diploid cells which are capable of undergoing meiosis to form gametes. So, these are diploid cells capable of undergoing meiosis. So, if we talk about say human beings, the germinal cells, germinal epithelial cells of testes or the follicular cells of the ovary, they have 46 chromosomes and they are capable of undergoing meiosis to produce haploid gametes. That means the number of chromosomes in each gamete would be 23 in case of human beings. And we also know that every species has a fixed number of chromosomes. So, if we are given this number, that is in meiocytes, we can find out the number of the chromosomes in a gamete, or if the chromosome number is given to us in a gamete, then we can even find it out as its diploid number. For example, in Drosophila, that is fruit fly, Drosophila or fruit fly. If I say the gametes have chromosome number 4, what is the chromosome number in its myocytes? What does this mean? That I have given you the chromosome number in the gamete, and we know the number of chromosomes in a gamete are always half as compared to the parent cell. What are myocytes? Those cells which have undergone meiosis to produce these gametes. So, the myocyte should have 8, which is its diploid number. When a myocyte containing 8 chromosome undergoes meiosis to form gametes, then the number of gametes is 4. So, even if one number is given to us, we can find out the other number. That is the significance of myocytes. So, these are certain important things which we need to know before we actually take up the sexual reproduction in plants and human beings in details. So, this part is included in our basic chapter of reproduction in organisms. Now, let us discuss the questions which are given in our NCERT book.